Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Uh, Welcome again and Happy New Year. First, acknowledging the events of this week weigh heavy on our hearts and minds. I'm grateful to have this opportunity to gather together for a discussion focused on positive changes we can collectively make in our communities. And speaking of changes, you'll notice that we're debuting our recently rebranded Sustainability and Action Roundtable, which many of you have known for years as the Sustainable Atlanta Roundtable. Along with the hardships and challenges of 2020, adapting to our new work realities also offered us unexpected opportunities. In bringing SART online, we've been able to broaden our audience and panelist pool. As a result, the focus of this SART and of our SARTs in general have expanded to discuss challenges that not only affect the Southeast, but the country and the world, reflecting on Southface's increasing reach and engaging in over 30 states and 5 countries and territories to advance solutions to help speed the transition to a regenerative economy. Today's topic offers insight and solutions to an issue facing so many coastal cities. And it's also timely for Southface and our exciting partnership with the Florida House Institute located in Sarasota, Florida. In the years ahead, we look forward to weaving together Florida House's legacy of impact and Southface's vision of an equitable and healthy environment for all into one powerful force to expand our work with on-the-ground presence in Florida. So with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Charles Reith, President of the Board of the Florida House Institute and moderator for today's events. Charles has been a lifelong advocate of the environmental solutions, from his own long-established consultancy to decades of teaching sustainability both at Tulane University and the American University of Nigeria. Charles is an expert in all the environmental challenges facing Sarasota and has been such a tremendous asset to the South, to us here at Southface as we embark on a collective effort in 2021. Thank you, Charles, for all your great work and for leading today's discussion. Over to you, my friend.
All right, well, thank you. And it's certainly fair to say that we at the Florida House are very enthusiastic about this merger with this partnership with the Southface Institute, and I know I speak on behalf of all the board members in saying that. So if we can bring up my first slide, I am going to address for you, with you and with our panelists, who I'll be introducing shortly, our efforts to manage stormwater so as to avoid a deterioration of our coastal environment here in Sarasota. You can see we have a beautiful coastal resource to protect. And certainly we're delighted to be the subject matter of the first renamed SART, but we intend for today's discussion with you to be instructive, helpful to other coastal communities who are struggling with the same issue of non-point source pollution from stormwater. Next slide. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes before you hear from our august panelists, telling you a little bit about the geography and background of this. Here you see the Florida Peninsula, and the next build will show where halfway down on the west we're working with. Is this something I control, or will somebody else bring up that image of the watershed? There we go. So we're just south of Tampa Bay, and here comes a closer image of the watershed and the affected water that we are concerned about. You can see we have Sarasota Bay and Little Sarasota Bay, which are profoundly influenced by runoff and any nutrients or other pollutants that are transported. These bays are separated from the Gulf of Mexico by some beautiful strand islands or keys that and they communicate closely with the Gulf. So problems in the bay affect our Gulf beaches and environment as well. Next slide, please. We have a number of, well, let's back up a little bit. We have a number of watersheds that contribute to these bays in the context of one larger watershed. Their discharges into the bay are through a variety of different watercourses, ranging from vegetated meandering bayous, if you will, and variously engineered stormwater discharge systems. Now we'll see the next slide, please. So what we're dealing with here is non-point source pollution, nutrients and other pollutants that are lifted from the land, liberated by stormwater, and carried into our water courses. You see croplands rather prominent in the on the left side, and you won't hear much about them, but by way of background, I will say that farming far afield, for instance, in the sugarcane industry, does add to our challenge, and so does the influence of the fertilizer industry that supplies agriculture, which is just inland. However, next boundary, please. The focus of our discussion will be on suburban and urban development, which is moving very quickly here in Sarasota and creating negative impacts that we're working aggressively to mitigate and even offset. Next image, please. The consequence of a failure to properly manage non-point source pollution in Sarasota and many coastal communities could not be more keenly felt. The nutrients and pollutants feed algal blooms, in our case, red tide, which makes the water pretty much not only makes the water unswimmable, but results in fish kills. And in fact, the whole beachfront and near beach community becomes very unpleasant to visit because of the odors and an irritating cough caused by red tide. Can you imagine the economic impacts of a 9-month red tide on a community such as ours? Next slide. So this linkage between the economy and environmental quality that you'll hear about today perhaps could not be more direct, immediate, and profound. There are some other themes I want to key you into that will, I hope, heighten your appreciation for the outstanding presentation and discussion ahead. Look at the continuous spectrum between the natural and built environment and our efforts in managing the built environment to restore natural ecosystem services, or those that are provided by natural habitats. Watch for the interesting integration between the technology to manage non-point source pollution and social outreach. You're going to hear from Jennifer a fabulous program of using social media to engage the communities. The words holistic and integrated are perhaps overused in the sustainability field, but since we're dealing at the watershed scale with solutions in so many different areas, interacting solutions, I use those words with confidence, as this being a classic case study. And finally, I'll call your attention to scale. And next image, please, shows how we range in scale from watershed through neighborhoods and the parks and streetscapes of our urban habitat, and even individual buildings and residences. Next slide. At every scale, basically what we are trying to do is restore ecological services that have been lost by the natural habitat that preceded development. Inland in Sarasota, a common habitat are pothole prairies that are wetland systems that catch, store, slowly release, and purify pollutants. This is lost as we develop into dense neighborhoods that you see here. However, I'm going to heighten your attention to the retention ponds there, which with better strategies can begin to emulate the ecological services of pothole prairies. And look on the bottom at the natural habitats on our immediate coasts. We all know the power of mangroves to purify water, but these have been regrettably lost to buildings and seawalls in our development. Next slide, and I bring them to the last two slides, which are real celebrations of this partnership between Florida House and Southface. The Florida house we are so proud of. It was built in 1995 approximately, and is a showcase of residential water stewardship, including stormwater stewardship. And look at this permaculture-inspired landscape that you see with a very limited turf footprint and Florida-friendly plants, as well as plants that happen to produce star fruits, papayas, and other fruits for you to enjoy when you visit us, as we hope you will. Our hardscape includes permeable pavements, bioswales, and we use cisterns. Now, look at Southface. Southface's facility in Atlanta is the best showcase I've seen of urban stormwater stewardship. Look at that slide, that image on the top. We have a green roof, an elevated cistern, and solar panels in one view. Closer imagery down below shows the infiltration features, and then the green roof again, and a cistern at grade. What a great partnership. We're so excited about it. It of course spans many dimensions besides stormwater, but now it is my pleasure to introduce these fabulous speakers. I'll first introduce our non-Sarasotan, who's going to bring a terrific insight as our last speaker, and that is Stacey Berahzer, who's a water project consultant with 18 years of experience. Through IB Environmental, she helps funders, nonprofits, utility companies, and communities fund and manage their water projects to make the water clean and affordable. She specializes in policy related to water affordability and equity, as well as stormwater and watershed management. She comes from the Caribbean and has a background in Caribbean water and energy issues. You'll hear just before Stacey from Sandy Gilbert, a dear personal friend of mine who is the CEO of START, the clever acronym for Solutions to Avoid Red Tide. START is a 501c3 citizens organization that works to reduce the excess nutrients in our waterways that feed red tide and other harmful algal blooms. START uses public education, water quality outreach with policymakers to support actions for clean water and projects that reduce excess nutrients, several of which I collaborate with him on in stormwater at the Bay Product and Pond Restoration Program. Then just before him, you're going to hear from Jennifer Shafer. Dr. Shafer is a marine ecologist and a principal at Shafer Consulting, which facilitates and communicates science and science policy issues. Applying technical and creative design skills, she works with clients to develop insightful, creative solutions for protecting the environment through strategic planning, management solutions, and outreach communications. She also serves as the part-time co-executive director of the Science and Environment Council of Southwest Florida. I am very excited for you to hear about this consortium of 40 local science-based environmental organizations. And right after me, the next speaker, who couldn't come too soon, is John Thaxton. John creates and implements the Gulf Coast Community Foundation's key strategies for transforming the region's nonprofit community and providing leadership on emerging issues. John joined the Gulf Coast Foundation in 2012 after serving for 12 years as a county commissioner, and a very formative, this isn't in here, but a very formative, influential county commissioner indeed. His knowledge of the region and the relationships that he built as a public service are tremendous assets to his work. John is recognized throughout Florida as a leading advocate for protecting the natural environment, and in 1996 was featured in National Geographic for his efforts to protect endangered species. Wow, I am so excited to introduce John, and then they will hand it directly to the other panelists. Thanks.
Thank you, Charles. I am John Thaxton. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Gulf Coast Community Foundation. where we transform our region through bold and proactive philanthropy. I'd like to tell you about one of those transformation activities today, which is our community playbook for clean waterways. And I have Jennifer Shafer joining me, and she will take the lion's share of it. But I want to start with just a few background comments. The first one is, as this slide depicts here, the next slide, please. I would challenge anyone to look at any of the promotional material promoting Sarasota County, the city of Sarasota, our tourism from the Chamber of Commerce, our economic development activity, and find a visual that does not feature our waterways in some shape or the other. In fact, our entire economy, as Charles said earlier, is based upon these healthy waterways. And because it is so important to our area, special status has been conferred on many of the local water bodies, including the Wild and Scenic designation for the Myakka River, the Sarasota Bay National Estuary Program System, and several outstanding Florida waters in the area. A little bit of background. Our community has many, many decades of commitment to improving water quality. Sarasota County and the city of Sarasota had pioneering efforts, such as being the first county in the state of Florida to adopt a fertilizer management ordinance, the first county in the state of Florida to adopt a stormwater environmental utility for water quality and water quantity restorations, as well as many other activities, including seagrass restorations, and one of the most aggressive community-led conservation land activities in the entire country. So for decades, we've made historic gains in water quality that have yielded an overall increase in seagrass coverage in the Sarasota Bay Estuary, but there's more that's needed. So why are we focused on nutrients? Much like carbon, our natural environment only has so much capacity for the absorption and sequestration of so many nutrients. And the anthropogenic changes that have happened to the landscape have led to an over-nutrification in our waterways. So now nutrients, as opposed to being life-sustaining and life-creating, are now toxic pollutants. These have led to increased levels of macroalgae and phytoplankton that outcompete the seagrasses, which require this perfect balance of light levels and nutrients in order to flourish. We've also seen an increase in algae blooms, such as macroalgae, blue-green algae, and red tide is a particular concern to our efforts. Unfortunately, despite these historic gains, the monitoring that you see here of our seagrasses, which are an excellent indicator of water quality, show increasing nitrogen and chlorophyll in many of our bays, especially some of our southern bays, where we've seen dramatic decrease in seagrasses and increase in macroalgae. These conditions could lead to DEP designation as having impaired waterways, which of course is not only a concern for the ecosystems and public health, but is also an impediment to economic development. So as these coastal populations and development continues to increase in our area, we thought at Gulf Coast it was time to act holistically on this nutrient management. And we went to community leaders, asked them to begin to work together to co-invest with a smart way to deliver multiple benefits to the community. And thus the Gulf Coast Community Foundation Community Playbook for Clean Waterways was birthed. We convened a great deal of our local experts in the field of stormwater management and nutrient management. We coordinated all of our efforts with permit agencies so that it was a very transparent and collaborative effort. And it resulted in a powerful, curated collection of actionable community-wide nutrient management activities. It is meant to focus, prioritize, and coordinate these community activities with philanthropy, community leaders, governments, not-for-profits, foundation, businesses, and homeowners association. Now I would like to turn it over to Dr. Shafer, and she'll tell you a little bit more about the specifics of the community playbook for healthy waterways. Dr. Shafer?
Thank you, John. And Thanks to Southface for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'll just continue right on. So we've got the Community Playbook for Healthy Waterways. It's a powerful collection, a curated collection of actionable community-wide nutrient management activities, and it's organized around 3 goals. The first goal, and I'll move counterclockwise, is to reduce anthropogenic-based nutrient loading into our natural systems. Next slide, please. We do this by reducing the inputs from fertilizers, from biosolids, wastewater, septic systems, engine emissions. Secondly, we want to remove excess anthropogenic-based nutrients from the natural systems. Next slide. And we do this through means like land conservation, species restoration, green infrastructure, and effective stormwater BMPs. And then thirdly, the playbook is organized around those actions that can build capacity and resilience to sustain our water quality improvements. So this is education, incentives, partnerships, better data, and public policy. Next slide. So what's in the playbook? The playbook integrates 43 specific community-wide activities across 10 topics that consider watershed issues holistically. The strategies were identified, as John said, through facilitated in-depth discussion with local experts and practitioners, and then further developed through research, data analysis, and expert interviews. These 43 activities are laid out in an easy-to-navigate website, which organizes them around the 3 goals: reduce, remove, and sustain, and by topic. Next slide. Each of the activities is structured in the same way to support first steps and foster implementation. Each activity provides relevant and helpful information to get started. So this is intended to be a playbook, an action book. So the activities outline why this needs to be done, the context, whether it's historical or regulatory, and the key players and the status quo. It outlines a specific approach and key steps for implementing this activity. It offers resources and experts to consult, and performance measures and cost estimates. So these are meant to be sort of like tear sheets. So you could grab one of these activities of interest, develop a plan around it, develop an RFP, request for proposals if you're a funder. So it's an easy way for leaders across the community to get started. For scientists and educators and policymakers looking for activities that are specific to their wheelhouse, to their skill set, the playbook activities are also key to the 3 approaches of science, policy, or education. And so these navigation links are offered throughout. Next slide. So the 10 playbook chapters are shown here in the watershed perspective. And this graphic actually serves as the visual navigation into the playbook on the website. Many of the nutrient management strategies focus on harnessing nature to help rebalance the cycle, the nutrient cycle, and actually restoring and supporting natural lands and wildlife. And where that's not possible, installing green infrastructure is really the most effective way to take nitrogen off the menu for harmful algae. So these are activities related to enhancing habitat, to stormwater management, to species restoration, etc. Some of the other strategies require new and improved technologies, such as upgrading wastewater treatment plants to advanced treatment. In our area, improving one of our wastewater treatment plants could remove 6 times as much nitrogen than what's currently being processed. Upgrading septic systems, we'll hear a little bit more about this later, is also an activity that needs adoption of improved technologies by adding nitrogen treatment components. Septic systems are really not designed for nutrient removal. They're really designed as public health, with public health concerns in mind with bacterial removal. Some of our other activities to clean up stormwater require changing our behavior, adopting more sustainable practices, especially with regard to fertilizer and soil management. And finally, a significant source of loading that gets less attention is atmospheric deposition. We need to clean up the air to clean up the water by shifting away from gas-powered equipment and vehicles. Next slide. We credit the vision of John Thaxton at the Gulf Coast Community Foundation for bringing this talented group together. This is a list of our steering committee members, the experts who helped develop these activities, this overall strategy, and shared their time and expertise. Special thanks to our co-authors, David Shafer and Steve Swaw. Steve took the lead on gathering original data and doing some unique analysis on the science activities. So this is the first comprehensive, detailed, locally calibrated nutrient management strategy to be developed for implementation by leaders across the entire community. In fact, it could serve as a model for other communities who might want to adopt a playbook. It aims to focus, prioritize, and coordinate community activity and philanthropy to organize, fund, and motivate gains for water quality in our community. You can check out all 43 nutrient management strategies in the playbook at waterqualityplaybook.org. Thanks so much. I'll hand it over.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jennifer. Again, I'm Sandy Gilbert with SART, Solutions to Avoid Red Tide. And we have an objective of working to reduce the excess nutrients in our waterways that feed red tide and other harmful algal blooms. Today, I'll be talking about some of the ways we do that through our stormwater treatment program. The first example involves our ongoing 5-year clam seeding partnership with the Sarasota Baywatch. We fund the purchase of mature native clams that are resistant to both predators and red tide. They're great water filterers, these larger mature clams, because they filter 20 gallons of seawater a day, and the females release millions of eggs to repopulate the colony. This new restoration market helps clam farmers economically when they can't sell clams to restaurants because of red tide. And now, after 5 years of this program, there are over 1 million seeded clams in Sarasota Bay that filter over 20 million gallons of seawater every single day. In recent years, our focus has shifted from in-water mitigation of nutrients to more preventative measures by treating stormwater before it runs into our waterways. And the following programs reflect this important change in our strategy. You are now looking at a map of the 53-acre Bay Park, now in development along Sarasota Bay. Working with Progressive Water Resources, a hydrologic engineering company here in Sarasota, and John Thaxton's Gulf Coast Community Foundation, START helped fund the creation of a unique 4-part holistic stormwater filtering system at the park that includes a 600-foot-long denitrification barrier near the mangrove walk on the right side of the map that will filter the stormwater runoff from the site. The restoration of an oyster reef where the lagoon flows into the bay on the left side of the map, followed by a clam seeding program with the Sarasota Baywatch at the entrance to the bay. And finally, the use of underdock mini reefs and reef balls near the Sunset Walkway in the bay that will attract water filtering sea life and fish. When completed, this multifaceted system will annually filter 15 million gallons of stormwater from the park, again, before it runs into the bay. Joining START and the Gulf Coast Community Foundation in funding this project are the Sarasota Bay Rotary Club and the Sarasota Bay Estuary Program. START's stormwater work continues with our support for the microforest recently installed at the Sowerly Fields here in Sarasota. It's part of our partnership with the Sarasota Urban Reforesters that include Florida Veterans for Common Sense Foundation, the Sarasota Bay Rotary Club, and the Sarasota Manatee chapter of the Florida Native Plant Society. Microforests are a tight grouping of trees and shrubs and herbaceous plants that help deal with stormwater by providing flood control, filtration of excess nutrients, habitat for birds and wildlife that have been displaced by urbanization, carbon sequestration as a hedge against climate change. And lastly, our commitment to greater nutrient control and stormwater moves forward with our main focus in 2021 in restoring impaired stormwater ponds. We are doing this because nitrogen in Sarasota Bay, despite all efforts of many people and organizations, has in fact doubled in the last 20 years. And seagrass and fish stocks are down, and stormwater is a major source of excess nutrients in the bay. And experts tell us most stormwater ponds in our area are only functioning about 40 to 60% effective in removing nutrients. As a result, our goal is to partner with other organizations to help neighborhoods improve ailing stormwater ponds like you're looking at, so that they become, in the next slide, attractive and more functional ponds like this. START is especially focused on upgrading stormwater ponds because restored ponds can make a measurable difference in water quality downstream. You're looking at Cormorant Lake at Lakeshore Village, and in just 20 months of restoring their pond, they improved water clarity by 50%. They reduced chlorophyll by 50%, phosphorus by 30%, and nitrogen by 22%. So in closing, we hope that hearing about START Stormwater Treatment Program will encourage other organizations to join us in our ongoing effort to improve the quality of our waterways. Thank you. And now our next speaker, Stacey, will you take over?
As Charles said, my name is Stacey Isaac Berahzer. What a time we are living through right now. My hope, like Andrea mentioned, is that we each work towards the balance between action and healing that's right for each of us. But we are glad that you're here today to engage in this topic with us. A little bit of background on our firm, Ivy Environmental, on our next slide here, is that we look at 4 different main areas. So we have 4 focus areas, and just to mix things up a little bit, we'll read them from right to left. So Caribbean environmental management is perhaps our smallest portfolio right now. Most of the work here has been on mentoring young people to choose a career in environmental protection, but we are also looking now at the response to the pandemic and the role that renewable energy and energy efficiency might play here. Then next, we have our stormwater and watershed management focus area, where we mainly focus on financing options. So in other words, that third area, funding sources, some of which I'll be sharing with you today. And then really the biggest part of our work is this last area of water affordability and equity, how you fund an array of water projects while mitigating the impact to low-income customers. So that's in a nutshell what we work on. Since the focus today is on coastal issues, we'll start with our Caribbean work. Most of which has been in Trinidad and Tobago, and that's also where my accent is from. This country of Trinidad and Tobago is a twin island republic, and it's the most southern country in the Caribbean chain of islands. One of the most special things about particularly the north coast of Trinidad is that leatherback turtles come there. So they come back to the exact beach where they themselves hatched to lay their own eggs. So that's pretty remarkable. So you'll see here on the slide 2 particular areas, Paria Bay, and then Grand Riviera is actually the beach with the largest population of nesting leatherback turtles in the world. And these are huge turtles if you haven't had a chance to see one. They grow to about 7 feet long and they can weigh up to 2,000 pounds. So they are a really tangible reason for protecting the coast and water quality in this part of the country and in this part of the world, really. So if we look at the US on the next slide, in terms of the United States, as a nation, we started with managing point sources of water pollution. So as you can see here, some examples would be wastewater treatment plants and factory outfalls. So these sort of pinpointed pipes, if you will. Then we progressed to dealing with non-point sources of water pollution, such as detention ponds, for example. And these are places where the water is sort of collected from a large area, basically, and then treated to some extent. And then we moved on and sort of progressed or evolved. We started to move to more distributed green infrastructure projects, which you've heard many of the speakers talk about today. So there's been this evolution from point sources of pollution to non-point sources. But note that this still involves managing these point sources. So we still have sewer spills, for instance, and we still have, to keep up with those point sources of pollution, of course. And I claim that this is an evolution, but that little picture that just popped up on your screen is of a cistern, which is a type of green infrastructure that you had mentioned before. That little green plaque on that cistern says 1890s cistern was used as a storage tank for the collection of rainwater in the days of cocoa and coffee, when those two industries, cocoa and coffee, prospered. So this picture was actually taken at that Grand River beach where the leatherback turtles come to nest. And so while it's an evolution and a progression, in some ways, the old has become new, right? Some of these simple infrastructure technologies are what we really need to manage stormwater. So although green infrastructure projects are mushrooming across many states, and they need to be, the single site, larger green project seems to be the more dominant approach. At least it's more comfortable for local government staff who manage water. The wetland project, which is directly connected to a wastewater treatment plant, is a little bit easier to digest, especially in terms of a repayment plan. So if you had to borrow money to fund a stormwater related project, it's a little bit easier to see how you repay a project like that. So in other words, local governments are more challenged when it comes to the more distributed types of green infrastructure projects, such as rain gardens or permeable pavement, okay? So if we look at the local government level first, right, these are some of the challenges that green infrastructure poses. They've been scattered or distributed because the science shows that the most effective way to treat stormwater is as close as possible to where the rain falls. So that means that you're going to have these infrastructure on private property, and that's not how a lot of local governments were structured traditionally. So traditional repayment mechanisms for loans or even government accounting systems weren't set up with distributed infrastructure in mind. It hasn't been clear to local government officials how to enter trees as assets in their books, right? So there has to be a pivot, and it's happening. If we go to looking at some of the financing options for stormwater, we'll talk mainly about stormwater utilities because I believe they're a very good way to address water quality concerns and even quantity concerns such as flooding. Grants are great, but they are few and far between when it comes to local governments and their access to those. So a loan is a more realistic way of funding or financing your water quality and water management projects. The state revolving funds, or SRFs, exist in each state and territory, and they are low interest loans that local governments and in some states nonprofit groups have access to in order to address water projects. The Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, or WIFIA for short, is sort of the newest kid on the block. It's a fairly new funding program. Section 319H funds have been available for a while. They are a grant fund program. However, a local match is required, and that can be a challenge for some groups. Bonds, have to mention, are a growing and evolving way to address water quality concerns, especially when it comes to the innovative types like environmental impact bonds that we've seen in Prince George's County, Maryland, and in the city of Atlanta as well. So we're looking forward to seeing more in terms of bonds when it comes to ESG concerns and that kind of thing. But like I said, I promised we would dig into stormwater utilities a little bit more. And from a national perspective, there are many stormwater utilities across the country, as you'll see in this map. All right, so from a 2017 study done by the Western Kentucky University, we're seeing that there are many, and these little dots represent them. And then the next chart is going to show you how the total number of stormwater utilities have been growing. So if we look at 2007 compared to 2018, there has been a lot of new utilities that have come into being. In the Southeast, if we hone in a little bit into this region of the country, this chart just shows for the Southeast, except Florida, when these utilities sort of came into being in this part of the country. This is from an organization called the Southeast Stormwater Association, and Florida has its own Stormwater Association. And according to the Florida Association, there are about 170 stormwater utilities in that state. In terms of scale, like Charles mentioned, we're going to move to the household scale now. We seem to be, as a society, as humans, maybe we need to divide things into buckets, right, in order to understand them and manage them. So these are the local government buckets, if you will, for categorizing and managing water, wastewater, and stormwater. And there are rates and fees, of course, associated with each of these types of water services. And while each fee or bill is needed to generate the money to manage water resources, we need to keep in mind that the financial burden that they can place on lower income neighbors is a real thing. And so, like I said before, that's where IB Environmental really spends most of our time and energy. So with that little overview, I want to just talk a little bit more about septic tanks as well. They've come up before. According to some of the other resources that speakers on this panel mentioned, there are about 35,000 to 48,000 in Sarasota County only. And I just, point out this one blog post that we did recently, and it relates to septic tanks and the pandemic, but basically all septic tanks will fail in theory eventually. And so how does a homeowner put aside the money to address that? And it costs thousands of dollars to replace or repair these things. Unfortunately, one of the areas of our work is that there are not many sources of funding from the government, for instance, that would help homeowners to repair these things. So some tips in this blog post on how the homeowner can kind of prepare for that inevitable failure of septic tanks. And yeah, with that, I will yield to the Q&A session, but here is how you can contact me, particularly if you wanted to follow up.
Okay, well, that was fabulous. I think the other panelists should bring their cameras on because I have questions for each of you. I had prepared some questions in case there weren't any great ones, but there certainly are. I'm excited to share them for you and to applaud our panelists for really giving an excellent overview of the subject matter and kind of fleshing out some of those frameworks elements that I mentioned at the beginning. The first question I'm going to put on the floor, which I'll address mostly to you, John, or at least to get you started with it, since you're a former elected official. You can tell this is written by one of our treasured Sarasota environmental advocates. This person wrote, from a policy standpoint, are there prospective policies that are envisioned right now, perhaps at the city and county level, that advocates can, these would be policies to reduce nitrogen and otherwise mitigate this problem. Are there policies that voters and activists can begin activating, begin advocating for that would help this group implement or actualize your vision?
There are, Charles, there are actually quite a few. And rather than getting into the weeds with the specific changes that we're advocating in our development codes and review processes, and that kind of systemically what we are advocating in this playbook is to take all of these decisions that government officials, policymakers, bureaucrats, and permit review agencies do and begin to look through this nutrient management lens as they review these activities. Because prior to this, many of the review processes were done looking through the lens of an engineer or the lens of a plumber or whatever, but rarely were the scientific concerns of nutrients considered in those decisions. So both in terms of new construction development, retrofitting existing buildings, household activities, condominium and subdivision activities, all of those, for instance, when a homeowners association or condominium association is charged with reviewing their landscape contract with their consultant, we're suggesting that this concept of looking through this nutrient management lens be added to the review process. And it's only through this systemic, holistic change are we going to be able to bring about both substantial and, more importantly, sustainable change in the nutrient loading in our local waterways.
Great. Any of the rest of you have comments on that or additional information? I certainly have other questions to direct to each of you. Well, that being the case, then, Sandy, the next one is rather predictable because I did tell a lot of people in these homeowners associations about this talk, and several wanted asked you, what exactly would somebody do to a retention pond to make it more effective as a filter for these agents? I saw some of the photos that you presented. What would be some specific examples of the types of things you're doing that would cause a retention pond to release fewer nutrients to the bay? You're muted.
You hear me now?
Yes, indeed.
Just so you know, I'm not an expert on all this. START is a facilitator. So we work with experts that will answer that question, although I can have some answers. And we help fund the process. That's basically how we work. But the main thing a neighborhood can do is figure, how do you keep more nutrients out of your pond? And the simplest and most effective way that everyone is recommending is a no-mow zone with higher grass or shrubbery that quite simply keeps fertilizer while being applied out of the pond. Then you apply other plants and things in the pond and where the water meets the land to help take some of the nutrients out of the pond itself. That's tougher. The big thing is just keeping more from going in. And by the way, those are the most controversial things because you have to sell some neighborhoods that aren't used to a quote lake, which most of these ponds aren't, to look like that. But the key is once you get over that barrier, people understand and very anxious to comply.
Superb. Well, thank you. Jennifer, let me toss it to you. Oh, go ahead.
Charles, I just wanted to add one anecdote to that. What we're seeing in some of these areas that Sandy is referring to, we're now seeing real estate ads that feature the backyard and the retention pond, as opposed to the front of the house, which is the typical real estate ad, because there's so much wildlife activity and it provides such a soothing effect to the property that realtors are now using it to promote the sale of these $500,000+ homes.
Yeah.
Well, very good. And actually, before the question on Jennifer, I'll just mention from my own experience, I'm on the board of my homeowner association, and we are really involved in the economics and looking at the benefits of these low maintenance zones to life extension and their role in preventing a bank failure and erosion that shortens the lives and health of the banks and sets a community up for big expenses. Now, Jennifer, and I'm going to pique your ear, Stacey, because you're probably going to have some follow-ons to this. Stacey did a great job talking about septic tanks, and before she even discussed it, I'd gotten a question for you that to what degree does the nutrient playbook or your outreach program encourage septic tank pump outs, and that perhaps set the stage for long-term septic tank solutions that you would see in this network? And then Stacey, be ready, because I would think there's a bit of an equity issue there, and that's a really important Southface theme is, you know, how do we create this requirement for septic tanks without creating an economic burden for those who have septic tanks? But Jennifer, first, septic tanks and the nutrient playbook.
Sure, thanks, Charles. The nutrient playbook actually has an entire chapter devoted to septic management, and there's a variety of solutions that are outlined from, first of all, understanding that all septics are not equal. They're different in age, they're different in location, they're different in the qualities of the underlying soils, the slope of the property, the volume, etc. So one of the recommendations is that we get to know our septic tanks. In fact, Sarasota County, Manatee County, we don't actually know exactly how many there are. We have a pretty good estimate. We pretty much know where they are, but we might want to tighten up that database. With regard to pump outs, there is a chapter on sort of educational outreach on septic ownership and what owners can and should be doing with regard to maintenance. There has been legislation proposed but not passed, suggesting that septic maintenance ought to be required every 3 to 5 years. And in our analysis, what we found is that taking care of a septic system, doing regular maintenance and pump out is quite a bit less expensive than getting connected up to central sewer. So homeowners, I would think, would easily be able to take care of that responsibility, considering the alternative. The other really interesting thing in the playbook is Steve Swah's work, where he explores these advanced septic technologies. Stacey, you might want to speak to this. The cheapest alternative that he explored were these so-called bio trenches, like the one Sandy spoke about, installed at the Bay Project. Basically, you dig a big trench that intercepts the groundwater flow, the contaminated groundwater flow, and fill it with some sort of carbon source, wood chips, sawdust, very, very inexpensive byproducts of Florida industry, and that can sort of soak up and suck up the nutrients through bacterial denitrification. I'll hand it over to Stacey.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, septic tanks, what bothers me with them is that they're not going anywhere. So at one point, we felt as a country that eventually everywhere is going to be sewered and everybody's going to move off of septic tank onto public sewer, and that's not happening. If you look at the Metro Atlanta area, we have a lot of septic tanks here. Again, Jennifer, we're not sure exactly how many, I think, but there are 12,000 on average new permits for septic tanks in the metro area every year, such a developed part of the country, right? So we have to live with them and we have to manage them. We can't wait for them to go away, unfortunately. So in terms of how a customer finances the repair or the replacement of their septic tank, it does create some equity issues. We're not talking about a couple $100s here, we're talking about thousands. One source of funding has been 319 programs. Like I mentioned, some communities will work with a local government and they will offer basically a partial grant or a whole grant to the homeowner to replace their septic tank. That does not cover most areas of the country though. Another thing that we're looking at right now too is the linked deposit program. So the state revolving fund program has an option where it's a financing structure where they work with a local bank. And so basically the homeowner can go to the bank, get a loan to replace that septic tank or repair it, or get on public sewer, I guess in some cases, and not pay interest. So I can talk more about that later. I can point you to some articles if you're interested in that. But how does someone come up with these thousands of dollars? There are not too many identifiable funding sources there. What we do put in the blog post is that if you're on public sewer, you might be paying, let's say, $400 a year in terms of your sewer bill. If a homeowner, a septic tank owner, is diligent enough to put aside even a fraction of that every month, they will have the money to do the recommended pump out, for instance, every 3 to 5 years. They technically will have the money to replace it, but it's one of those issues. Again, it's a distributed problem. Technically, the homeowner is responsible, but ultimately the local government has to pick up the tab, and we all suffer from the environmental degradation.
Fabulous. Okay, well, I'm going to toss a question to you, Jennifer, related to the SEC. But before I do, I did want to make this point. John Thaxton mentioned Steve Swah a few minutes ago, and he's an example of one of the people that have been working this problem for years and years and developing some very sophisticated engineering solutions. And I wanted to emphasize the nonprofit point and kind of the softer stakeholder-driven approach, which are general for all communities, but that background is important to acknowledge, and also the amazing leadership of government, that there is a stormwater department at the county level that has provided consistent leadership and also advocated for this cause with every new wave of elected leaders that comes in to preserve the continuity of the effort, and then incredibly effective cheerleading, if you will, from county scientists. So I didn't want that to go unsaid. Now, what I really wanted you to address, Jennifer, is this Science and Environment Council. And one thing a lot of non-Sarasotans wouldn't know is we have a real powerhouse nonprofit here called Moat Marine that is a popular aquarium. It's a must-see if you come to Sarasota, and outstanding research in the red tide area. We have a beautiful botanical gardens and many others. So talk to us a little bit, Jennifer, about how you coordinate the awareness and contributions of those two, Maurice Selby and Moat Marine, but all the other powerful and active members of the environmental community through the Science and Environment Council.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk about Science and Environment Council. It is a member organization, 40 members strong across Sarasota and Manatee counties of local science-based environmental organizations, nonprofits, government agencies, and some small businesses who dedicate their mission to environmental improvement. And you ask how we do it, how we coordinate. Well, it's really remarkable. I think this is a unique organization, certainly in Florida, maybe across the nation, where nonprofits who normally compete with each other, for donors, for grants, etc., come together to work on projects that no single member on their own might do, but still we put together that Venn diagram of their missions. So there's a portion of their mission that they want to fulfill, and they can do that better, more effectively if they come together with other organizations in the community. So practically speaking, the organization has two membership types, institutional and affiliate. We come together 4 times a year for council meetings where representatives of those organizations network. We talk about issues. We have professional development webinar type opportunities. In fact, I want to give a shout out to at least 10 organizations from SEC are on the webinar right now. START is a member, Florida House, Southface is a member. I see Sunshine Community Compost, Sarasota County, both UF-IFAS Extension, and Stormwater, Sarasota Baywatch, Stalking Savvy, City of Sarasota, Sarasota Bay Foundation. We're all here and participating in this webinar.
And Florida House, a longtime member, and I think Southface has already, in anticipation of its presence, joined. If not, I'm sure they will soon. So
that's right.
Okay, well, I just can't thank the panelists enough. I was excited about this, and it all came together very well. I think we could talk for another 2 or 3 hours, but our time is up. Those of you who are non-Sarasotans, you've got 4 friends in Sarasota. And so look us up if you come down here, and we'd love to show you around the environmental community, show you some of these retention ponds, the Bay Park project, and tell you about the SEC. So it's been a privilege for us to talk about Sarasota and to get Stacey's excellent perspectives from her background. And if I am understanding the process now, I'm going to hand this over to Catherine. And again, thank everybody for participating. And as I think she's going to do, encourage you to join the Zoom breakout groups. Thanks all.
Thanks, Charles, and thanks to our panelists. What a great discussion. Before we head to the Zoom breakout rooms to continue the conversation, we have a couple poll questions to gauge interest and other ways to connect. So those poll questions will pop up in a second. We'll give you 10 seconds to answer each question. It's only 2 questions. Topic-specific networking events. Looks like it's in the lead. Great. All right, next question. All right, people like this time. Okay, good to know. That's very helpful for us. Thanks for participating in our polls, everyone. And now I'll announce our prize winner. Drum roll, please. The professional membership winner is Catherine Mercier Baggett, and I promise I did not choose her because she has a great name. Congrats, Catherine, and be on the lookout for an email from me to collect your prize. Make sure to check out our website, southface.org, for future events like our next roundtable, which will be March 5th, and to find online trainings on our learning platform. Thank you for coming to Southface Institute's January SART. We hope you stick around and join us for our Zoom breakout rooms. I've just added the link in the chat box, so make sure to click on that link and you will be directed to Zoom. You may need to end your GoToWebinar session before you can enter the Zoom, but make sure to click in here first on the bit.ly link in your chat box, and we hope to see you over there. Goodbye, everyone.